Good evening, everyone. It's a little after 7, so we'll get started tonight. As usual, people are still arriving. I was just thinking it's kind of hard to believe this is already May the 2nd, especially in view of the fact that they had a big snowstorm out west. My stepdaughter was heading to Colorado today and was faced with about 8 inches of snow. Russ Parham's up in Minnesota. I don't know if you got snow up there, and Jim Stokes is in Canada. But it's crazy weather, and it's chilly here on the East Coast as well. My friend George Hollins and Susan were out here in South Carolina at Myrtle Beach a couple of weeks ago. Now they're back in the Midwest where it's nice and frosty. So the weather is definitely unpredictable. Just a couple things about our sessions. This session tonight is going to also be a little bit less than an hour because it's not about content. There's not so much content to deliver tonight. I want to give you some things to work on that are going to move you forward, hopefully. And so this session will be probably about 45 minutes. The other thing is the one session that we missed, I've been reviewing all the material that I want to cover before this class is over, and rather than extend the class by a week, I think we're just going to wind up with 11 sessions instead of 12. So you don't need to worry about pushing it out to, I believe it would be May the 30th. So we will end on May the 23rd, I believe it is. So having said that, Russ says, yes, they did get 8 inches of snow. So Lakshmi's in Singapore, and it's 7 o'clock in the morning over there, I believe, and I don't believe they've ever had any snow there. In fact, I don't think it gets below about 80 degrees Fahrenheit. So anyway, welcome tonight. Let's get into our material. If you've looked at the handouts, you probably know why there are two little girls with baby doll strollers on the slide, but if you haven't, you'll find out in a few minutes. Because tonight we want to talk about moving forward. Before we do that, just to refresh your memory, our last lesson we talked again about belief systems. We talked about how to achieve your goals, which included staying motivated and responding to setbacks. And one of the things that differentiates very successful people from those who aren't is the fact that they stay motivated and they are persistent in pursuing their goals. And there are 82 people registered for this program, and tonight we have 10 so far. We may get a couple more people dragging along here. I know I got emails from people saying they couldn't be here tonight, so they'll watch the recording later. But the numbers have just gradually dwindled down, and I know that's probably because the recordings are available, so if you miss the evening session, it's not a big problem, and I'm happy that that's true. But it does, you do see that in a lot of cases, persistence is the problem for a lot of folks. It's hard to stay motivated and so on. Now tonight, we're going to talk about taking action to actually move you forward from where you are right now. And I'm going to use an example of a person who did something unique and became tremendously successful, a lady named Pleasant Rowland. If you have children here in the United States, especially girls, you may know about the American Girl doll. She was the creator of that, and I'll tell you about her in a moment. I want to talk to you a little bit about planning and thinking using mind maps. Some of you may be familiar with these and some may not, and if you're not, it's something that I definitely think is useful to you. And then I want to talk about creative thinking with Scamper and the PowerThink app. So those will be the topics tonight. One of the things that you will remember that we talked about in the very first session was the need to take some sort of step to move you toward your goal. And we said that you don't need to know exactly how to get there, but you need to take that first step. As Confucius said years ago, many years ago, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step, but you have to take that step. Now, there's going to seem to be a contradiction here because I'm going to talk about the need to plan and the need to not plan. And the need to not plan means don't waste time going into planning paralysis. The universe favors action, so you need to do something, and you'll be led from one step to another. But there is a certain amount of planning that is helpful, and you have to sort of find a happy balance in there. And so we'll talk about how you can do that as we go forward here. Now, here's a question that I wanted to ask, or have you ask yourselves tonight. We talked in one of the sessions previously about finding your life purpose and doing something that you love. And here's another way to get at that. If your life could be absolutely perfect, what would it be like? What would you be doing? You want to begin moving toward the life of your dreams. Now, for some of you, it may be that you want a position with a company, an established organization. You might aspire to be a vice president or a president or CEO or something. That's fine. You may also want to be in business for yourself, or I should say alternatively, you may want to be in business for yourself because, generally speaking, if you talk about having a position with a company, it's with some company that you don't own. If you start your own business, you can be the CEO and whatever you want to call yourself. Some of you may be interested in writing, dancing, singing, or performing in some way, something in the arts. And I've talked to you about the fact that society would have you think that there's no way to make money in the arts, but there is. In fact, some of the highest paid people in the world are in the arts, especially music and that sort of thing. And the trick is to make this real in your mind. If you keep thinking, I can't do it, or I can't see me doing it, then you probably never will. So as you can see in the illustration on this slide, this woman's dreaming about being a dancer. So as long as she can visualize that, then she can make it happen. So that's the first thing. If life could be absolutely perfect, what would you like it to be? Now, one of the things that I mentioned also in an early session is you can always come down to reality, but if you start with a limited belief, you'll find it's hard to go up. So, as Russell Ackoff used to say, go for broke. Imagine the perfect situation and then ask yourself, okay, how can I get there? Now, I want to tell you about Pleasant Rowland. As I said, she was the creator of a doll called the American Girl doll. And I want to tell you how that happened. I used to have a project management certificate program at the University of Wisconsin in Madison. And Pleasant had a company. Her company was over in Middleton, Wisconsin, which was just a few miles away from Madison. And she contacted me because she heard about my programs, and we did a project management program for her staff, and she was just really taken by that and said that she wanted to teach project management skills to girls because it's something that normally they wouldn't be exposed to. But I spent a day with her as a consultant helping her think about succession planning because she had decided that she was going to essentially retire so that she could spend more time with her husband, who had had a bout of cancer, and so had she, and they wanted to enjoy life instead of working so hard. And so she told me how she came up with the idea for the Pleasant Company, and I think it's worth knowing about because it'll show you how these things evolve. As a matter of fact, as a little aside, I would suggest that you read biographies of successful people so that you get an idea of where these ideas come from, because invariably people who are successful have come up with an idea that's unusual and unique. Pleasant was actually an educator. She was a school teacher, and she visited Colonial Williamsburg in Virginia one Christmas, and I've put a picture here of the governor's palace. Colonial Williamsburg was where Thomas Jefferson was educated. It was sort of almost the capital of the United States for a short period of time. It wasn't officially a capital or anything, but it was a very prominent city. And she visited this place, and she was sitting there watching, looking at the buildings and the surroundings and thinking how beautiful it was. And she then thought, you know, when I was a girl, I was totally uninterested in history. In fact, if anything, disinterested or even turned off by it. And some of that is because American history teaching back in our younger days, when I was young, was all about memorizing dates and things. They didn't make it interesting. All they cared about was that you could regurgitate all those dates and things, and a lot of us were very turned off to that. And she thought she had missed a lot because she didn't know anything about the time period and how people lived and things of that nature. And that's what makes history really interesting. And so she asked herself, how could she get girls interested in history? And I'm going to tell you how she came up with this idea in a moment, but she came up with the idea of dressing dolls in historical costumes and selling them with a booklet that told about the period represented by the doll. And that was the genesis of the American Girl Doll Company. She was doing, I believe, $300 million a year in business at that point in time, and they were growing at the rate of $50 million a year. Now, if you do simple math there, folks, and I used to be an engineer and I've about gone brain dead on math now, but that's $1 million a week in growth, which is absolutely incredible. And so a couple years after I worked with her on succession planning, she sold the Pleasant Company to Mattel, the toy company, for about $700 million. She is listed in the Forbes group of people who are in the upper tier of income. I believe the threshold is $500 million. You have to have that kind of money to be listed in it. And she was one of the first women to make that grade. Now, it was interesting, too, because she told me that most people think that Pleasant Company is a doll company, but what they really are is an education organization. So let's see where this came from. When she got back to Wisconsin from being in Williamsburg, she spent a week in a cabin up in central Wisconsin. She and her husband owned this little getaway place, and she just went up there and spent a week just thinking, how could she get girls interested in history? And her business plan emerged out of that period of thinking. Now, initially, the idea was just to do the doll, but over time, the company evolved. They started a newspaper for girls and later a magazine. They still have the American Girl magazine, which is intended to teach girls life skills, and they target only girls age 7 to 11. And one of the things that I found about this woman was that she had an absolutely uncanny ability to empathize with girls in that age range and know what they like. And so this was how she positioned that company, and over time made a huge amount of money. So I was thinking about this as a good example of what it takes to become truly successful. And there's a couple of things that I wanted to share with you. Now, I mentioned mind mapping a while ago. This is one of the most useful tools that I know of for planning, for generating ideas, for just thinking in general, for outlining a book or an article that you may want to write. And I've constructed a mind map that she might have done had she gone through this process. And this is totally a fabrication of mine. I have no idea how Pleasant went through her thinking process. But you notice that in the central box there it says, interest girls in history. So this was her question: how can I interest girls in history? And she might have listed a few things that occurred to her, such as, what are some things that they like? So that's the branch in the upper right. In the lower right, there are learning methods. Over on the lower left, there are, how can we give them incentives to learn? And then in the upper left, we have, what are some objectives that I would have to achieve in order to make this happen? Okay, so let's start in the upper right side, things they like. Well, if you know anything about girls 7 to 11, and of course it changes over that period of time, but they like things like coloring books, they like tea sets, they like games, and most little girls like dolls. And so I'm going to go ahead and finish fleshing this one out. under coloring books, well, first of all, they come to her somewhere in there about, hey, they like dolls, so how about I dress them up in historical clothes and make a booklet about the period. And then the coloring books, I could make those as some kind of an accessory. So that might have been some of the thoughts that came to her. Before she ever got to that, though, she probably thought about learning methods, and she thought about books and videos and CDs, audio recordings, and lectures. These are some of the ways that we provide information to people so they can learn. And then she might have thought about, well, how am I going to give them incentives to learn history? Well, maybe we could make it fun somehow, and perhaps we could find a way to engage other friends of the little girl, and we also might want to have some rewards of some kind. So those are just a few thoughts. And then what would be some of the objectives? Well, as I said about persistence a moment ago, how do we keep them interested over time? And one thought would be, okay, if you did provide a doll, you come out with new costumes periodically so that, well, there is a monetary incentive for you. You get to sell some more things, but it also keeps the doll fresh and new, something different. And then she also may have conceived the monthly magazine. And she might also have thought, well, in addition to teaching history, how about we teach life skills? We know that this evolved out of all this stuff. So this mind map is a great tool for thinking through these kinds of issues. And the nice thing about it is it's not a linear progression. You can jump all over the place. You know, she might have started with things they like, jumped over here to incentives, up to objectives, back over to learning methods, back up to objectives again, you know, just all over the place. And it's a great writer's tool. I've written 12 books. I've used mind mapping on quite a few. I've also used it for product design and so on. So it's a great tool to have in your toolkit. I made this one with My Manager software. If you're not familiar with them, just Google them and you'll find them. You can download a 30-day trial copy of the software and use it. And I believe in giving attributions to people who have intellectual property rights, and Mind Map is actually a trademark of a guy named Tony Buzan in England. And Tony developed this thing for note-taking in school because he found that he had a terrible time trying to remember what was taught in a classroom, and he found that mind mapping made it possible for him to remember things a whole lot easier. So that's where it came from. Now, I said to you earlier, if you study successful people, you find that most of them had some sort of a creative idea that was responsible for their success. Now, it doesn't have to be something totally radically new, but it may be a twist on something that's already been done. And one thing I heard someone say a while back was, it's been said that we don't lack opportunities, but we lack original ideas. And you can learn creative thinking methods if you apply yourself to it. Now, I put a few examples here. FedEx. Smith had the idea of delivering packages and letters and things overnight because he realized that people are impatient. They want things right now. They don't want to have to wait for it. This is one of the things that I love personally about ebooks from Amazon. I can get on Amazon and have an ebook in my Kindle reader within just minutes and be reading it. I don't have to even wait overnight. Starbucks originated because I forget the name of the fellow that founded the company, but he was in Europe somewhere having coffee in a sidewalk cafe, and thought how nice the experience was. And originally they were just selling coffee beans and that sort of thing, but then they gradually evolved that into the stores. And Starbucks is more about the experience than it is the coffee itself, because there's a kind of a ritual that goes along with going in and having a latte or whatever, and meeting your friends and having a little sit-down chat or whatever. Of course, we're in such a rush all the time that they also have drive-through windows, which bewilders some of my friends from Japan. that we Americans can't even sit down and enjoy the coffee. We got to drive through and drink it on the way. Apple Computer, of course, is the ultimate example of a couple of guys that had a dream. Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak designing personal computers in Steve Jobs' garage, and he then came out with the ideas for the iPad and iPhone and all the other things that they've produced. So innovation, creativity. Facebook, of course, was a great idea. Google was another idea. And what you'll find if you look at people like Henry Ford, Thomas Edison, Alexander Graham Bell, all of them came up with ideas to solve some sort of problem that nobody even knew they had at that time. And of course the Wright brothers were dealing with the desire to fly, which people did understand that if they could do that, it would be great. If you haven't watched Sir Ken Robinson on TED, www.ted.com, he talks about creativity in children, and he says creativity is having original ideas that have value. And I think the have value part is really a worthwhile component to that definition, because a lot of people have ideas but nothing ever happens with them, or they're not useful or whatnot. Of course, you need to be aware that things like the Post-it note, when that was invented, that is, when the adhesive was invented, nobody could see why anybody would want an adhesive that wouldn't stay stuck. And so it took about 10 years for them to finally realize that there was a practical application for that product. So sometimes you have to break down paradigms before you can move forward with something. As a matter of fact, one of the metaphors for creative thinking is thinking outside the box. Now, a lot of people may think of it as a physical box, but what it really refers to is conventional ideas about the nature of things. In other words, paradigms. I had a group up in Wisconsin kid me about the word paradigm because I like to use it so much. It's one of the most important words in any language, and they got me a card and taped 2 dimes to it, little play on words there, and gave it to me. So a pair of dimes. And breaking paradigms is extremely, extremely difficult. I've told you about that in a previous class. The Swiss invented the digital watch, but they didn't think it was worthwhile because it had no springs and gears in it, and they didn't even bother to patent it. So they showed it at the Watch Congress that year. Seiko and TI came by and saw it, and they said, hey, they didn't patent it. That means we can make it if we want to. And over the next several years, the Swiss lost tens of thousands of watchmakers, and that's a true story. And so original ideas sometimes are met with non-acceptance simply because they violate conventional paradigms about the nature of reality. And that was a perfect example. Now, one way to break paradigms is to think about using a technique in creative thinking called reversals. And I'm going to show you on the next slide some examples of those. So on the left-hand side, here are some conventional wisdoms about the way things are. And on the right-hand side is a column containing reversals of those conventional ideas. And I've told you about this first one. I did this myself in a class in Singapore years ago. I was on my way over and I was thinking about how classrooms work, and I thought, well, you know, normally teachers teach and students learn. And I thought, why not let the students teach? And as I told you also, I found later on that this was the way things worked in the old one-room schoolhouses in early colonial America. And so I thought I had invented something really clever, only to find that other people had been doing it. I found also that in medical school, this is the way surgeons learn. They watch someone do surgery. They then do it under supervision, and eventually they teach someone else how to do it, and the real learning, the master learning, takes place when they teach it. Next one, we have to reach out to customers through advertising. Well, a guy named David Meerman Scott has a book called The New Rules of Marketing and PR. in which he says, this is all wrong today. Actually, he and Seth Godin both have been talking about the fact that if you do something outstanding, customers will come to you. Now, at the very simplest level, I have been doing this since 1991 when I wrote my first book. Once you write a book and people read it, if they like what they read, they are inclined to call you and ask you if you can help them in some way, because the book says you are essentially an expert. And when I started to go into this business that I'm in, I interviewed a half a dozen people who told me that the key to success in consulting and training was to write. And so that first book proved to be true, and there have been 11 more since then. And as a consequence of that, I have had to do almost no selling. People come to me and say, hey, can you come teach us? And so instead of chasing customers, you want the customers to chase you. This next one, you may remember Napster and all the other situations where people were essentially ripping off music because the conventional wisdom has always been that people have to pay for our music recordings. And I'm drawing a blank at this point in time, having one of those senior moments, but there was a group, a music group, who decided that they were going to change that. They essentially encouraged people to come to their concerts and record the concerts and listen to them for free, and the recordings were essentially free, but the concerts cost money. And of course, the more they did that, the more popular they became, and the more people followed them. Tom Macy says it was Radiohead, and thank you, Tom, because I could not remember right then. So there's an example of reversing the way the model worked. This next one is one that we've talked about in these sessions. Changing oneself is a slow, tedious process, and actually the reversal of that is that change can be easy and instantaneous. And I can't remember if I told you about this in the last session, but I read in one of the NLP books that I have that they were working with a woman who was a medical doctor, and they were helping her to get rid of allergies, and she actually was an allergist. She helped people with allergies, and it turns out that our belief systems can actually make us more susceptible to those kinds of things, and so they were helping her to rid herself of some beliefs that were contributing to the allergy problem. And we're not saying it's all in your head, we're saying that it's a contributor. And when she realized how easy it was to make that change, it also struck her that if it was that easy, then her job was almost gone. There was no need for her as an allergist unless you were to go into helping people change beliefs. And there are a lot of therapists that think if it's quick, it can't be lasting. And yet the NLP people have been proving for many years now that that's not true. And in fact, it turns out that in many cases we develop symptomatic behavior in a heartbeat in the first place. So if we got ourselves screwed up very quickly, why can't we get ourselves well very quickly? That's a very easy logic to see. And then, of course, the last thing on the list here refers to the sticky note. The belief always has been adhesive should be permanent. You know, we don't want things to come unglued because they fall apart, and that creates real problems, and that's generally true. But in the case of the Post-it note or the sticky note, you want an adhesive that can be easily removed and yet does stay stuck long enough. The genesis of that adhesive, by the way, was a fellow who liked to put place markers in a hymnal at church, in a hymn book at church, and his markers fell out all the time, and so his friend at 3M said, well, we could make a removable adhesive here and keep them in place, and if you want to take them out, you don't tear up your book. So that was actually the original idea. Okay, so those are some examples of reversals. Here's another technique. I call it simply questioning, but the real essence of it is to always begin with what if, what if, what if, okay? So this could easily lead to ideas for something different. So, for example, what if meals were free in a restaurant and we charged for entertainment? By the way, I'm sure somebody's doing this somewhere in the United States or somewhere in the world. I just don't know about anybody specifically, but some of you probably know. What if educating children were done by private business instead of the government? We know that the government always spends more money and is more ineffective than private business as a rule. And so, and if any of you are in government, I'm sorry if I'm stepping on your toes, but it's just the fact that big bureaucracies become ineffective over time. And there's an awful lot wrong with our school system. So what if it were taken over by private business? What if I could get paid for what I know instead of what I do? This would be a question for a lot of you to ask, because the old conventional paradigm about getting ahead was that you had to work hard, work hard. I'm sorry, folks. There's hardly anyone in the world who ever worked hard who got ahead. Now, they may put in a lot of hours, they may put in a lot of time, but they're doing it at something that ultimately pays huge dividends, as in the case of people like Thomas Edison and Henry Ford. I love the story about Henry Ford. He got so engrossed in building his horseless carriage, which essentially is what it was. It was a horse-drawn carriage that he put a motor on and a steering mechanism. And he was building it in his garage, and he got so engrossed in building it that when he finished building it, he realized that it was too big to go through the door. He then had to tear the door down and get the thing out, or else he disassembled it and got the pieces out and reassembled it outside. I'm not sure which, but it wouldn't go through the door because he hadn't thought about that. The lower left corner, what if I produced art on demand rather than up front? In other words, instead of painting pictures and hoping somebody will come in and buy them, what if you had a business where people come in and tell you, I'd like to have a painting of such and such, and you did that on demand? There may be people doing that too. Actually, portraiture is done that way, but I'm thinking about general art. Upper right corner, what if people paid to work rather than being paid to work? Wouldn't that be interesting? Actually, that's done too. But could you create a business that way where people paid you to work there? What if it were part of their learning experience? What if children were schooled at home over the internet? This has actually been being done in Australia for quite a long time, because the kids are spread out over such huge distances that busing them to school is not practical. And I predict that in the next 20 years or maybe 30 years, this is going to be something that we're going to see here in the States. I mean, we're spending a huge amount of money to bus children around in terms of gasoline, buses, and the whole thing. And it can be done just as effectively over the internet, or it will be possible to do that in a few years. What if you could make paper from dirt? Right now it's made out of trees, and trees are becoming scarce, so what if you could do it out of something readily available like dirt? What if I could get paid for having fun? I was watching Good Morning America last week or 2 weeks ago, and they actually just hired a young college guy, paying him $36,000 a year to go around and test water slides. This company has a network of these things all over the world, and he's getting paid to go around and slide down these water slides into a pool. In other words, he's being paid to have fun. I'm paid to have fun. I want all of you to think about how you can be paid to have fun. My friend Tom Macy, who's online and answered my question a while ago, I think Tom gets paid to have fun. I think Russ Parham gets paid to have fun. So hopefully more and more of you are doing that, because it's work shouldn't be work. It ought to be a fun thing. The lower right-hand corner, what if therapists were paid only for positive results? This is one of the few professions, and my PhD is in psychology, although not in therapy itself, but organizational behavior. But therapists are one of the people that can get paid without actually helping a patient get well. In other words, the patient doesn't get well, but they still get paid. And so what if they were only paid for positive results? Would that change their behavior? Would it make them look for new and better, more effective ways to do therapy? I expect it would. Okay, so how do you generate some of these wonderful ideas? Reversals are one way, but there are some other techniques. And so one of my favorite ones is to use a word scamper to generate ideas. And no, not the kind where you scamper across the ground, but the word scamper, use the letters to represent words or use words that start with those letters. So, for example, we could use substitute, combine, add, modify, preform, eliminate, and release. We could use those words. And I'm going to show you a bigger list, excuse me, in just a moment. Now, one of the ways to do this is to list the attributes of the problem that you're dealing with. So in Pleasant Rowland's case, how can I get girls interested in history? If she were to list the attributes of that, she would have to have some kind of a thing that she could use to get them interested in. Like I said, coloring books are things that girls like, and dolls are things they like, and games and so on. So there has to be some sort of attribute. There have to be some objectives as we listed in the mind map. You then select a word at random from this scamper list. And so, for example, if we used combine, we could say, okay, combine the doll with the book. All right, and that's what she did. Or we could say eliminate something, eliminate all that date memorization, and that would help. Okay, so you list attributes, then you ask yourself, how can I improve that attribute in some way or deal with it? And you continue that until you have a solution or you have just run out of ideas. And then you choose another attribute and repeat it. If we were thinking, for example, about something as mundane as the light bulb, the conventional incandescent light bulb, and we're asking ourselves, how could we improve it? Well, it has a filament, it has a glass envelope, there's a vacuum inside the bulb, there's a base that connects it to electricity, and in fact it needs electricity, it needs a power source of some sort. If you ask yourself, how could you eliminate the need for a power source? Well, that would suggest that we have to have a battery either built into the bulb or a power source built into the bulb, or else it needs to be connected to a portable power source, and that was the genesis of the flashlight. Okay? You could also ask yourself, could you eliminate the glass bulb, because those things break, and it would be awfully nice if they didn't. And could you eliminate the filament? So LED lights do both. They eliminate the glass bulb and they eliminate the filament. Okay, so let's see how this can work using a bigger table, a bigger list. Now, you'll notice that the columns all start with the letters S-C-A-M-P-E-R, and down the column are words that start with S or C and so on. And so one of the ways you could do this is to just randomly say, well, let's use M and the seventh word in the list. I just randomly picked 7. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Mince. If I were trying to improve a light bulb, what would mince have to do with anything? And quite frankly, nothing occurs to me with mince. So you try a word and sometimes nothing occurs to you. Suppose we talk about modifying. Use the first word in the list. That might lead to something. We can modify the base so that it doesn't screw in, it snaps in. Those exist, by the way. Suppose we mutate it. Mutate means to change its shape in some way. So you notice that the new fluorescent bulbs have the spiral or the circular filament, or not filament, but fluorescent device in them. Now, if you really are trying to think of ideas, it doesn't take very long to generate good ideas using this table. And this table is built into the PowerThink app that is available for both the Android and the Apple platforms. And I'll give you a reference to that again in a little while. But what happens with it is we list the attributes of the problem, and then the app will randomly provide words from this list to us, and we can then write or type into the app the ideas that occur, and then we can either email those to ourselves or we can send them to Catch, which is an app that some of you may know about that syncs with all your devices. So it's a note-taking thing. Evernote's a similar one. Some of you probably know about Evernote. And so what I'd like to do is have you think about some situation that you're dealing with that you would like a few ideas for, and list one of its attributes, and then just randomly pick a word or two and see what kind of ideas you can generate for yourself. And I am going to ask you to do this live right now, and I'm going to be quiet for a couple of minutes and just let you think, and then we'll just see how many of you got some ideas from the process. So I am going to poll you in a moment, have you raise your hand if you got ideas. So I'll shut up now and let you work for a couple of minutes. Okay, I can't spend too much time on this, obviously, because I just got dead air time here. But if you came up with some kind of an idea for a question that you posed, raise your hand so I can just see if it helped a few of you. There's a couple of hands. Wonderful. Okay, that wasn't very much time, and some of you may need more time. Try using a combination of mind mapping and Scamper together, because what you'll find is that if you use those two things together, it will really help you to generate ideas. And I'm going to give you a reference to a book in a moment that you can also use. In fact, I'm going to do it now. I told you about the PowerThink app. If you get on the Apple App Store and the Google Play Store and search for PowerThink, run the two words together like you see it on the slide here. By the way, I added this a while ago. I forgot to put it on your slide or your handout. But this app will do Scamper for you, and then you can, as I say, you can send all the solutions to yourself. The neat thing about this is you can put it in your phone, and you can sit on an airplane and you can generate these ideas, and you don't need to worry that you'll lose them. So you have a capture device at the same time that you have a random generator device that helps you think of ideas. Now, the little book here called Thinker Toys, a handbook for creative thinking techniques by Michael Michalko. I have used this book for years and years, at least 20-some years, and I absolutely love it. It's just chock full of techniques for helping people generate ideas. And what you find, folks, is that there will be one technique that works really well for you and another one just leaves you totally cold. For example, some of you may find Scamper doesn't work for you. It works really well for me, but I do know that it doesn't work for everybody. So it's nice to have a toolkit like Thinker Toys so that you have lots of different approaches. Roger Von Eck also wrote a book called A Whack on the Side of the Head, and he has another one called A Kick in the Seat of the Pants. And he has some different approaches to generating ideas that are quite good. And he does have an app for the iPad where he presents you with cards that suggest techniques. Machalko has cards also, but he doesn't have an app for them. And I wish Von Eck would make the thing available for Android, because I use an Android phone instead of an iPhone. I just got a book called Red Thread Thinking. That almost is a tongue twister, by Deborah Kay. I got the ebook version of it, and I have read enough of it to be convinced that it's going to be tremendously useful to me in coming up with ideas. And so those are a few sources of help for generating ideas for yourself, so that you can hopefully come up with something that's going to make you a lot of money one day, and you don't owe me any royalties for it at all. So your assignment for this week, I'd like for you to think about, as we say, if life were perfect, what would you be doing? Would you be in business for yourself? Would you be dancing or singing or playing music or whatnot? List something you'd like to have some ideas for, such as a new business, and then list at least 3 major attributes of that subject or problem, whatever you want to call it, and then try using Scamper to generate ideas on how that attribute could be improved. And if Scamper doesn't work for you, go to the Thinker Toys book and pull out something from it, or try mind mapping it and see if that helps you generate ideas. And a couple suggestions. This works best when you're in a sort of a meditative state, so it's a good idea to do this early in the morning or late at night when the house is quiet, there's nobody around, TV's off, nobody's likely to be calling you on the phone. In fact, bury the phone someplace unless you're using the app on it, and you'll find that the ideas come more quickly and easily if you're in a quiet time. So that's our session for tonight, and I have a few minutes that we could take questions if anyone has one. So you can type your questions in the question form, and we'll see if you have anything. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions. Again, you can email to me if you need to, lewisinstituteinc@yahoo.com, and I'll be glad to try to answer your questions. And so that's it for tonight, and have a good weekend, folks, and I'll see you here same time next place. I do have one question here. Reversal seems a lot like brainstorming in general. The big difference is that you're doing this one by yourself instead of with a group, although you can do it with a group, and it forces you to break through paradigms. That's the big difference, Tom. Brainstorming doesn't necessarily do that, because you may brainstorm within an existing paradigm and be limited in the ideas that you generate. So that's the biggest difference I know of. Thanks very much, and good night.